Throughout Donald Trump's presidential campaign, he said he would end the war in Ukraine on day one of his presidency. Trump was inaugurated 70 days ago, and every Trump ceasefire deal has failed thus far. Russian drone and missile attacks on Ukraine's energy and civilian infrastructure continue, and Ukraine reciprocates. Even today, civilians were struck in Kharkiv. Trump has also failed to secure Ukrainian mineral rights because Ukraine is getting very little guarantees from the deal, so why sign it? Even though Zelensky never signed a deal for those rights, it hasn't stopped Trump from saying, quote, Zelensky, by the way, I see he's trying to back out of the rare earth deal, and if he does that, he's going to have some problems. Big problems. Again, there was no mineral deal signed so far. But the actual problem is Trump really has no actual recourse here. If he cuts off aid to Ukraine once again, then Putin will have zero reason to come to the negotiating table because he's getting win after win without having to give anything up. Trump is doing it for him. Meanwhile, Ukraine is actually coming to the negotiating table and seemingly being punished for it. And while Trump has said he was angry at Putin for continuing to launch drones during the supposed ceasefire that really never existed, there has been no punishment or response from the US. Trump has threatened Russia with additional sanctions and secondary sanctions to those receiving Russian energy, but we'll see. The follow-through of the United States is not great, and I said that in a previous video. Thus far, the failure to secure the ceasefire by the Trump administration boils down to really two things. The first is the strategic miscalculation of Trump's administration in understanding fundamentally what Putin and Zelensky are willing to accept, as well as what they're willing to sacrifice. Trump is approaching this whole thing as, well, I would take the deal. Yeah, well, you're not Putin or Zelensky, and they're far more committed than Trump is for obvious reasons. Now, the second thing that is inhibiting this ceasefire is Russia's continued tendency to negotiate in bad faith while receiving no punishment for doing so. But on top of that, Putin gleefully watches as Ukraine negotiates in good faith but still is threatened by this administration. The ceasefire efforts are being undermined by the profoundly different objectives of the three leaders involved. Trump has prioritized ending the war quickly as a flagship foreign policy achievement, often framing it as a personal triumph in deal-making. He wants it as a personal victory, not as a victory for Ukraine and Western democracy, or frankly, even as a victory for Russia. He just wants the deal, which is why he holds so little sway right now. It's optics for him, not life and death. So his approach has leaned heavily on economic incentives like the proposed rare earth minerals deal with Ukraine or threats of sanctions or tariffs against Russia. However, this strategy assumes that both Russia and Ukraine can be pressured or enticed into compliance, an assumption that overlooks the deeper geopolitical stakes for each side. Ukraine does not care about a mineral deal because they're fighting for their life. Russia doesn't care about sanctions because Putin has weathered them so far, and besides, we know that Putin is willing to cause severe harm to his own people for his own personal gain of taking Ukraine. And if this means that the Russian economy continues to suffer, so be it. Now, Putin, on the other hand, is pursuing a strategy of attrition and maximalist goals, using negotiations as a tool to buy time while maintaining military pressure. Russia is stalling to secure concessions such as sanctions relief without committing to a genuine pause in hostilities. The Kremlin's inclusion of conditions like reconnecting the Razokaz Bank to SWIFT and lifting sanctions on agricultural trade in the Black Sea deal reveals this tactic. These demands are well-known and willful Russian poison pills that are difficult for the US to fulfill unilaterally because they will require European cooperation, which is not going to materialize because we keep stupidly burning that bridge, thus giving Russia an excuse to prolong the conflict while testing Trump's resolve. And so Trump, not wanting to apparently cause real harm to Russia, lashes out at Ukraine. Now, Zelensky, meanwhile, is caught between defending Ukraine's sovereignty and navigating not only waning US support under Trump's administration, but the personal egos of that leadership. Zelensky's initial acceptance of a 30-day ceasefire on March 11th was contingent on Russia's reciprocity, a condition Putin did not meet. The continued attacks on Ukrainian power grids, despite the energy infrastructure ceasefire announced on March 18th, highlight Russia's disregard for these agreements, putting Zelensky in a pretty precarious position. He must balance fighting Russia under an umbrella of ceasefire broken by Russia with the need to maintain Western backing to fight, especially as Trump ties future military aid to economic concessions like the mineral deal, which Ukraine rightfully views as exploitative. And that is the crux of the issue. The ongoing Russian barrages will continue to undermine the ceasefire's viability. Russia's bombardment using drones and ballistic missiles on places like Kharkiv yesterday and today, which is just days after the Black Sea Agreement, shows that Moscow is unwilling to de-escalate. Hell, Russian drones were en route to Ukrainian targets just hours after Trump's phone call with Putin, suggesting that even as agreements were being discussed, Russia had no intention of halting its operations. Oh, but we all saw Putin say stop doing it. Yeah, well, Putin's a liar. Welcome to Earth. And Ukrainian counteractions, such as the reported cross border raid into Russia's Belgorod region, indicate Kyiv too is unwilling to stand down unilaterally, especially as Russian forces continue to advance in areas like the Donbass and threaten Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Ukraine's drone strikes on Russian oil refineries, though less disruptive to Moscow than Russia's attacks on Ukrainian power grids, remain a bargaining chip Ukraine is reluctant to abandon without firm guarantees of Russian compliance and Western monitoring, something that Putin refuses to allow. So basically, we have a big nothing burger right now. Trump has misjudged Putin's intentions and overestimated the leverage of economic threats. Additionally, Trump's past reluctance to blame Russia for the war and his framing of Zelensky as a dictator have not helped the situation. Although Trump's stance has partially reserved, as he got angry at Putin over Putin suggesting Zelensky's presidency was illegitimate and wanting the UN to provide a transitional government which would have favored Russia due to Russia and China having veto powers. But it doesn't take away from the fact that the Trump administration has a wavering commitment to pressuring Moscow decisively. Why is that? Well, I guess Trump sees Russia as a more valuable partner than Ukraine. So as of today, the ceasefire efforts are crumbling under Russia's relentless assault on Ukraine. Ukraine's rightful counterattacks, and no deals, economic or otherwise, holding. Trump's ability to compel Russia or reassure Ukraine appears increasingly in doubt. But we all knew that the economic route was never going to work in the first place, and despite how many times we said that the only way to compel Russia to stop is to heavily arm Ukraine and then negotiate with Russia from a position of power in Ukraine, it seems like no one in the Trump administration was listening. Even Trump has to know that you cannot expect favorable negotiations from a position of weakness, and that is what is being conveyed about Ukraine, that the United States has shaky support for Kyiv and an unwillingness to punish Russia for its misdeeds. Until those are corrected, none of these deals are going to work.